Locked On Grizzlies with both co-hosts, Shawn Coleman and Damichael Cole. And with the NBA coming up, we've talked about why the Grizzlies might look at point guards. We've talked about why they may look at wings. But why would the Grizzlies, with Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, Steven Adams, Santi Aldama, already so much front court depth, why would the Grizzlies want to consider a potential center or another front court player? We're going to tell you right now in this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Shawn Coleman to Michael Cole. Here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello. Welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Always a pleasure to be with you. It's good to finally be back somewhat healthy. It's also glad that Damichael Cole has finally decided to come back to Memphis instead of globetrotting everywhere that he's decided to go over the past 2 weeks. Damichael, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Shawn. It's great to be back on here with you. You know, I get to hear some of your banner and your little sidebar jokes, but this is fun. You know, this is fun.
I'm always serious, Damichael. I don't understand what you're coming from. All joking aside, it's a pleasure to be back with Damichael. I know that me and him both have been doing a lot of solo episodes as of late, but hey, the thing is that's the point of having two very good talents. I'm going to go ahead and say that Damichael is the far better talent than myself. Obviously, writing for the commercial appeal as well as great perspectives as always here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Right here as well, right over with the fine folks at Grizzly Bear Blues. You can find me at StatsAC, Damichael at Damichael C. The podcast wherever it's available for free on all podcast platforms. Make sure you check it out. Listen, we're talking NBA draft because we're now less than 2 weeks away from the 2022 NBA draft. And once again, while the Grizzlies don't have a high pick, they have multiple first-round picks. And for that reason, we've been talking about different scenarios from the point guard position to the wing position, and now we're going to focus on the big man position. But before we get into some names that really could make sense to Michael, I want to pose the question to you. I just listed off 5 names that the Grizzlies have either drafted in the top 35 of a draft over the past 4 years, or a guy that came in last year and absolutely exceeded expectations in Steven Adams. Why would the Grizzlies need to go after another front court player?
It's an interesting situation because if you look at all these position groups that we talked about, point guard, you have Ja Morant. You're probably going to get a free agent back up easy. Wings, you have DeAnthony Melton. You have John Conchar. You have Dylan Brooks. You have Desmond Bane. You have depth there as well. But in the front court, it's loaded. It's loaded. There's so many options. Xavier Tillman, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson Jr. can play the 5, as we've seen in spurts. Steven Adams. You have all of these options, but at the end of the day, this is the position, Shawn, where I think if you look at right now, the Grizzlies starting lineup, this is the position that they have to address for the long-term outlook of this team. That's why center is important. So the Locked On viewers, if you're listening for this episode, think someone's going to supplant Steven Adams or an immediate starter, I'm not looking at it from that perspective. I'm looking at it from Steven Adams has 1 year left on his contract, on however that situation plays out, whatever they want to do there. Next year, whoever this player that they could potentially draft should be the guy they feel comfortable, because right now, do we think Xavier Tillman's going to be a starting center long term? I don't think so. Like what he did in spurts in that Timberwolves series, not a full-time starter. You can move Jaren Jackson to the 5, but then you create a power forward question right there. Brandon Clark, we like what he brings off of the bench. Even Taylor Jenkins likes what he brings off the bench. He could have started him in that Timberwolves series, had plenty of opportunities to start him against the Timberwolves. He still elected to bring him off of the bench for that scoring points. So at the end of the day, that's what this episode right here is all about. You're talking about long-term value. You're talking about someone who could possibly sit behind Steven Adams and be groomed. You don't need to groom anyone at point guard. That's Ja's spot. You don't need to groom anyone at shooting guard. That's Dez's spot. Right now, they're grooming Zaire Williams at small forward. You don't need to groom anyone at power forward because that's Jaren's spot. Center, who's that guy? We don't know. Shawn, that's why it's important.
And I agree. And the other thing that I'll say is this, is there's a couple of other reasons to Damichael's point, is that you know what you have right now, right? We listed 5 guys that you know what you have. But what about 12 months from now? That's a question that I'll pose. You know you'll have Jaren, and you know that you have Xavier Tillman and Santi Aldama under contract. But Santi Aldama, Xavier Tillman, over the long term, are they truly a top 8 player in a playoff rotation consistently? I don't think that's question can be answered as of yet. And then you've got Brandon Clark and you've got Steven Adams. Do one of them become a long-term option for the Grizzlies? Or potentially are multiple of these options outside of Jaren going to be used in a trade, in a consolidation trade? There's a lot of questions out there in which this depth that we're talking about could be consolidated or could be lessened a little bit based on potential moves that happen or decisions that happen with the Grizzlies. That's one. The second thing is you've got a coach in Taylor Jenkins who I think would really benefit from a true center, a true young center with some upside that, again, for a team that's going to have to be smart when it comes to cost options, they should go after a center when it comes to one that's going to be of value on a cheap contract. There's value there. And you've got a coach who would then have that center to be able to use in playoff situations. We see when teams like the Celtics and Warriors are able to go with size to counter what other teams do, and it's effective. The Grizzlies can do that with making the right decision on a center potentially in this draft. And the last thing is this. What about injuries? You've just had a season where you had very good injury luck with all your front court talents, but you've also experienced where you haven't had that much luck with Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson Jr. having a lot of injuries just during the 2020-2021 season. Having another young player with a significant upside, you hope that you have that in Santi Aldama, but adding another player that may be a bit more of a certainty than Aldama, that is not a bad way to go. And so that's the reason why I think there still is always the value in finding a front court player if the selection is right.
Yeah, and when we talk about front court players, because they have options, we've mentioned that, but this is upside. You look at the Grizzlies right now, struggled in the half court, right? That was one of the so-called weaknesses of this team throughout the season, half court scoring. You go all the way back to the beginning of basketball, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even today. The easiest way to score in the half court offense, you look at all the great college coaches, Mike Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, Dean Smith, all those guys. The easiest way is to throw it in the post and say, everyone get out of the way. That's highest percentage. Most big men are going to shoot well over 50%. And the Grizzlies didn't have a guy where they could throw the ball. I mean, they had Jaren Jackson Jr., who, at times showed it, but it wasn't really into that Warriors series, late in that series, when he really put his head down and attacked. But he had Draymond Green on him. In this situation, if the Grizzlies could draft a center who could do that, they don't have that right now. That's a big difference. Rim running and things like that, Brandon Clark is great at that. Jaren Jackson Jr. has showed spurts when he can play the 5 and do those things. But right now, they don't have a guy, a Karl Anthony Towns, or even, to a lesser degree, a guy like DeAndre Ayton, who you could give the ball to and say, hey, it's your ball. Get us a bucket in the half court, high percentage shot. That's something that the Grizzlies will need because you have the three-point marksman in Dez. You have the guy who can take you off the dribble and create in Ja Morant. Zaire Williams, I think, is a mix of those two things that we just said, and he'll grow into his body more. We'll really get to see what he is. Jaren Jackson provides that, but he likes to shoot a lot too. He's a floor spacer, and it works out perfectly beside Ja Morant being that way. But having that big man when it's 8 seconds on the shot clock and saying, here, everyone move out of the way. They have not had that since Marc Gasol.
And the other thing about it is that in today's NBA, I know that big men that could be effective at times during the regular season are a dime a dozen. But finding a big man who could do that while also being a chess piece in the playoffs on a cheap contract, that is of value. The more value the Grizzlies can find in these role players or these supporting cast members on cheap contracts, that makes it more likely they're going to eventually be able to land another significant talent to put with Ja, Jaren, and Dez. If they can complement that with smart draft picks at needed areas like center and maybe backup point guard, it'll be a great development for this Grizzlies team. Well, I'll tell you another great development for you. And that's when you want to bet and wager on sports. The development is Bet Online. Because I'll tell you this, for those that I know that have wagered and bet on sports, the one thing that they want to be made easy is the setup, is the way for them to be able to make their bets. And the easiest and fastest way for you to do it is betonline.net, whether it's pro basketball, whether it is baseball, whether it's college basketball, football, whatever it is, your opportunity awaits you at betonline.net. Make sure you check it out on your mobile device or your laptop. Make sure, for instance, one of the best bets that's out there right now is the Braves to win 8 in a row, baby. Okay, we're done there. But go to betonline.net right now. Make sure that you put it either on your laptop or your mobile device. You set it up, and it's going to be there for you to use whenever you feel it makes sense. Go to betonline.net. It always makes sense to make your betting and wagering easy when it comes to sports. Listen, can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. But the other thing that we want to remind you of is that next week, the Ultimate Mock Draft starts June 16th with over 50 insiders. Nothing equals the NBA Mock Draft. The Locked On NBA Big Board Draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate Mock NBA Mock Draft and the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. I wonder who the Grizzlies picked in that draft.
Shawn, if they've been listening to us, they got an idea. They got an idea.
I don't know who they may or may not. I don't know. We'll have to see on next week's Ultimate Mock Draft. So listen, at the end of the day, we could sit here and talk all day long why it makes sense for the Grizzlies to go after it. But now let's get into some names. And we've mentioned these names already. You know, there's not going to be any surprises here. But what is the avenue for these players to be talked about? Now, I did a show earlier this week, actually, I did it last Saturday, where I talked about some trade-up candidates that could be there. But I didn't really get into why it truly made sense, why these candidates would make sense for the Grizzlies. But Damichael, I know that you have a few names in mind, and I know that you've done a great job over the past couple of episodes. We start off with the names that the Grizzlies could potentially trade up for. And I do know there is two notable names, and one especially, and I'm pretty sure Grizzlies fans and even me and Tigers fans, and even me as a non-Tigers fan, I would be ecstatic to get one of these names. Break it down for us.
The first guy is Jalen Duren. He
Jalen
is the guy.
Duren. Jalen Duren. Yes, all day long. Jalen Duren.
Okay.
So I enjoy saying his name. I want for it to be said. Jalen Duren Ja. Go ahead.
Oh, Triple J. I'm here for it. I'm here for the Triple J effect. But man, Shawn, I first met this guy when he was in high school. I worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer. He played at Roman Catholic up there in Philadelphia. And people used to talk about how strong and dominant. Roman Catholic is a traditional powerhouse in the Catholic school programs up there in Philadelphia. But people used to say things about this guy, and it was like, I got to go see it for myself. Then I saw it, and I saw him play like once, and then he transfers out to Montverde. Then he dominates there. And when he dominated there, it's like, hold up. This is something special. Then he dominated at Nike EYBL. He dominated on the AAU circuit. He's dominated everywhere. He's not one of those. See, the thing with a lot of big men is you get a lot of late bloomers who are just big and they round into their size. This guy is legit. And he's young. He moved up. He moved up a year he reclassified to play his freshman season with the Tigers. But when you talk about Jalen Duren, Shawn, it's all about the strength. This is a guy, when you talk about strength-wise, we're talking Bam Adebayo, we're talking Dwight Howard. Strength-wise, I'm not speaking on all the skill set stuff, but strength-wise, Bam and Dwight Howard are two guys, day one in the NBA, there weren't a lot of dudes stronger than them. A lot of centers come in, they're thin, they get pushed around a little bit. That's not going to happen with Jalen Duren. At Memphis, I mean, you saw this season, especially as he grew into his role, he had the foul problems from time to time, averaged over 2.5 fouls per game, but 12 points, over 8 boards in 25 minutes, strong around the basket, no three-point threat at all. But, I mean, the Grizzlies don't need that. Right now, they need someone who is as strong as him and he can finish around the rim. And Shawn, I think there's a lot of potential for him to even get better.
Absolutely. And the thing that stands out to me about Jalen Duren is also upside, because you want to talk about the guy is one of probably the strongest pound for pound players in this draft. He also is likely to be the youngest that will be drafted in this draft as well. Saw that a few places, and it kind of opened my eyes. I did not realize he was that young compared to most guys. But the other thing that stands out to me about Jalen Duren is that, yes, offensively, he probably will need others to create for him early in his career. But when he does have the natural instinct, and he may not ever form into someone that's going to be a skillful offensive player, but there is athleticism and strength for him to be an offensive rebounding machine, for him to be a finisher around the rim, and for him to make plays. There is not, for the strength that he has, there is a springiness, for lack of a better way of putting it, around the basket as well that really, really gives him some upside. But here's the biggest overall idea that's there with Jalen Duren is that if the Grizzlies were to see him drop down to that 14-15 spot, I think it makes perfect sense for them to look to trade up for him. Because then could you imagine Jaren and Jalen, one of them being at the rim protecting him and the other being able to roll around to be able to create havoc on defense? You want to talk about an awesome pairing that also could work off each other long term if one were to be out with injury or what have you. I think that Jalen Duren, especially in the Grizzlies development track, would be an absolute stud to go after. If he falls in that 14-15 spot to find Zach Kleiman, I look to do as much as I can to get him locked up with the draft pick. But there's another guy who really comes off the page as instinct when it comes to instinct, when it just comes to nuance. He already has a natural advantage with just how big he is, but for his size, there is knowledge on how to use all of the tools that he has in place in a functional way to give him an advantage, even when you may not think he'd be able to create an advantage at his size. His name is Mark Williams, and he is certainly a threat to contend with, both at the rim on offense and protecting it on defense.
Shawn, Mark Williams is the guy I probably like the most from a fit standpoint. I love Jalen Duren as well because we all, like, for example, that series against Golden State, when Golden State went small, Jalen Duren is the type of guy who could have abused that matchup. Mark Williams may not abuse that matchup in the same way because when you talk about rim running and things like that, a la Brandon Clark, he does a lot of those things really well. But, man, defensively, he's the best center in the draft. He is a game changer. And it's not just at the rim. You know, we saw ACC Defensive Player of the Year this past season, 3 blocks a game. He averaged 2.8 blocks, Shawn, in 23, 24 minutes a game. This guy is a terror. 7'2", 7'1". He has a long-standing reach, close. We're talking 8 feet long. He measured as the tallest guy at the draft, had the longest wingspan, longest standing reach, and he uses all of that. When I think about how he fits for this team, his rim running ability, Brandon Clark is a threat as a rim runner. His rim running ability, teams are going to have to honor that anytime he dashes to the board. Think Rudy Gobert, DeAndre Ayton. Those are 2 guys when they set those screens and they dive to the rim. There's a big opening in the middle of the court because you can't leave them. And you have to honor them because they're so big. So there's multiple guys coming trying to defend, the alley-oop while trying to take away whoever has the ball. Ja Morant, Mark Williams duo with his athleticism and Ja Morant going downhill with Jaren Jackson, spotting up from the 3-point lines, that's going to be borderline. That could be borderline unstoppable. And Shawn, the defense, I mean, he can guard on the perimeter. He's not one of those big men, as you mentioned earlier, one of those guys you have to take out late in the fourth quarter, kind of how the Grizzlies did with Steven Adams most of this season. Let's be honest. Took him out in a lot of situations because he wasn't mobile enough to guard those shifty guards. He showed the ability to hold his own in those situations throughout the season. Shawn, this is the guy I think is the best. You talk about value, a guy who's supposed to go in that 15 to 18 range. You barely have to move up. It won't cost too much to move up. And he's a guy who could possibly, learn 1 year and come in 2 seasons from now and be a starter.
Absolutely. And the other thing that stands out about, Mark Williams, I think, is that, with him, he's significantly further as a product. I think he's much closer to being a finished product than a Jalen Duren. But one of the ways that I could describe a player like Mark Williams is that there's so much value that he has in the stuff you can't teach: the height, the length, the overall motor, the intelligence, but also there's plenty there for you to work with to teach. Like, for instance, I think Mark Williams, typically when you look at a guy his size and what he can do at the rim, both finishing and protecting, that's one thing. But I think that there's other nuances to Mark Williams' game that separates him from other centers in this, draft class that we'll talk about in a minute. Being able to make a defensive impact without the worry of fouling, being able to hit free throws, being able to create offensive moves on his own, potentially being someone that could be a playmaker on offense, which is a great added value. This is someone in Mark Williams who I think can add value in several different ways beyond just what he can do at the rim on both ends of the court. And that's what I think is a plus and separates him from a few other names that we'll discuss. And to me, to your point, having a guy like that who could step in on an immediate basis, not someone who's going to give the value of a Steven Adams from day one, but eventually could give that type of value, I think that's something that you highly value if you're the Grizzlies. And so to your point, if he falls a bit, I think that he's a prime trade-up candidate if the Grizzlies want to move up, kind of like what they did for Brandon Clark back in the 19 draft.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect example right there of how they moved up for Brandon Clark. But yeah, Mark Williams, you mentioned the free throw shooter. I didn't even mention that, Shawn. This guy shot 72.5% from the free throw line. That'd be great. I mean, Steven Adams was in the 50s last season. That's a big upgrade. They could really use that.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I can tell you is this, is speaking of upgrades, is look, we're always wanting to find ways to be able to upgrade our health, to upgrade our ability to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Well, feeling your best starts with what you eat. And Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Now's the time to seek wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of your life. Damichael Cole can speak to those three things anytime he does a podcast with me, starting with what you eat. With Sakara, you get nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without ever sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/locked-on20 or enter code locked-on20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/locked-on20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/locked-on20. Now, Damichael, everything that I said there was accurate, correct? Damichael?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, just thinking you were going to speak up. Didn't want you to go silent on me there. So the thing is that we're talking all things NBA draft, and we're going to continue this next week. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the more intriguing prospects. I'm not going to sit here and make it any surprise. It's going to be a lot of wings. It's going to be some players who can help out on the perimeter. And that leads me to the next guy that I think, probably isn't a natural fit for the Grizzlies. Probably doesn't make so much sense for Memphis with Brandon Clark and, all the depth that's out there. He's not the traditional center type, which I think makes more sense than maybe another, small forward type power forward hybrid, that unless that player is more of a perimeter-based player. But what I'm getting at is EJ Liddell out of Ohio State. He's a player that at 6'7", 240 certainly has the size. I know he's a bit of a tweener, but he has the size to make a difference down low. But there's some perimeter prowess about him as well, both in terms of shooting the three and also not necessarily being a complete liability on defense. I know, again, that we got some front court players, Damichael, who are probably undervalued with the impact they can make on the perimeter. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if value is the focus, EJ Liddell may be good value.
So here's the thing about EJ Liddell. You just mentioned the most important thing. He's 6'7", he's 240. This is a Big Ten all defensive performer. He has the defensive ability. He can bang. He's a forward who can play center. The thing about EJ Liddell that separates him from the rest of the prospects that we're going to talk about, we haven't discussed the potential move of Jaren Jackson Jr. to center. If the Grizzlies say, hey, Jaren Jackson Jr. is our center in the future, this is the perfect guy to put beside him. He can bang. If you have a matchup against certain centers and you say, hey, look, EJ Liddell can get him this night. He's 6'7", 240, strong guy. Let EJ bank with him. And he's Big Ten all defense. More times than not, he's 6'7", 240. Jaren Jackson Jr. is your 6'11" guy. They will play off of each other really well. The difference is with Brandon Clark, who you might say, what about Brandon Clark and EJ Liddell? EJ Liddell is coming to the league with three-point shooting ability already. This is a guy who shot 37% from three-point range this past season. Even as a sophomore, he only shot, and I mentioned this when I was talking about the wings and guards on the past couple episodes. In his sophomore year, he took 2.8 three-point attempts a game. Shawn, I'm a guy, when guys shoot that much, you know they can shoot the basketball. You're not shooting that much just because, one, your coach is not going to let you shoot that much. He shot 2.8 attempts as a sophomore. You knew the potential probably was there. It was his first year shooting that much, and it showed his junior year when he really took 3.8 attempts that year, and you're talking over 37%. So you get that three-point stretching ability. We talked about how big that could be around Ja Morant. Now you're talking about having four guys around Ja who could space the floor, and you don't want to leave anybody because he is the first point guard to lead the league in paint scoring in the past 25 plus years. Oh, this is a great fit from that perspective, Shawn.
And we've seen players like this who have made an impact on title contending teams. Paul Millsap, PJ Tucker, Grant Williams, these type of players. And I'm not saying that EJ Liddell comes on the level of those guys immediately as in the league, but that's also a range that he could be. But you bring up a great point, Damichael. Again, like I mentioned, 12 months from now, we don't know what it's going to look like. Could Brandon Clark have already been used in a trade to go get a bigger contract guy? Could he have decided to wait and have another great year and then be priced out of the Grizzlies' range in restricted free agency? What will the Grizzlies do at that point in time? Potentially need EJ Liddell, not necessarily get Brandon Clark's ability to score at the rim or with much efficiency, but a guy who can hold his own on defense but still shoot the three. So excellent point that, again, these picks are just not about right now. They're about the future as well. Going to throw out a couple of other names out there that I think are a little bit less on the expectations, at least immediately, threshold than a Mark Williams, or they don't have as high of a ceiling as a Jalen Duren. Their names are
lower prospects.
Walker Kessler and Christian Coloco. Now, I think in both of the cases of these players, you do have some interesting talents that could make an impact in limited minutes. But I think the reason why it's limited minutes is because they're a bit limited. In my opinion, you've got two players who probably are going to need a bit of creation from others when it comes to offense. And though they can make a bit of a difference, Walker Kessler, I know, is highly talented, is making a big difference on defense. I don't know if either one of these players can truly be trusted away from the basket, though. So I know that there's a lot of people who might like the name Walker Kessler, especially with him playing in SEC country. But at the end of the day, I'm not as intrigued with him as others because I just don't know if there's going to be as much opportunity for him to add value outside of that rim protection and finishing that probably is more limited to a true backup big than someone who may start for you long term.
Yeah, of those two guys, I'll focus on Walker because I remember this guy when he was coming out of high school. He committed to North Carolina, and he was kind of touted as a big man who had three-point shooting ability. If you go back and look at his high school highlights, Shawn, he was making some three-pointers in those highlights. But when he got to UNC and eventually Auburn, I mean, the three-pointer kind of vanished for him. 1.5 three-point attempts per game at Auburn, 20% from the three-point line. Barely even shot it at North Carolina, but he wasn't much better there. And I mentioned earlier on one of the other episodes, another indicator of potential from the three-point line is free throw shooting. Well, he only shot 59.6% from the free throw line. So that leads me to believe, unlike how people thought out of high school, there just isn't much potential as a shooter there. That takes him as a entirely different prospect. If the glimpses of shooting that we saw in high school from Walker Kessler, if he brings that to the league with him, with the way he can, he is very agile, as we see, over 4 blocks per game in college. I mean, this guy was a SWAT machine. We saw him put up double-digit blocks games where he was getting triple doubles and double doubles off of blocks. I mean, do you remember that, Shawn? He is a intriguing prospect from that perspective. But like you said, that screams specialist to me. That doesn't scream starter. Right now, the Grizzlies don't need a specialist at center because you have Xavier Tillman, you have Brandon Carr, you potentially have Santi Aldama as well. They need someone who can kind of be a game changer in some type of way. Will Walker Kessler be that guy? I don't know yet. And it's the same thing with Christian Coloco.
Absolutely. Either one of those guys are potentially, someone that could be a value pick, but I just don't feel I don't think that the Grizzlies really should put value in a project late in the first round at the center position. I think that you could qualify Jalen Duren as a project, but his upside is massive. I don't think you get that with the Kessler or Coloco. I also don't think you get the immediate contributions as well as the faith that you can have value elsewhere, like you did in a Mark Williams. And I also don't think that you have the outside presence that you do in the DJ Liddell. So hey, the Grizzlies may go with one of those guys. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. But I will tell you what does make sense is the fact that the Grizzlies again always seem to put a little bit extra when it comes to their draft picks. And what I mean by that is that it's not just about fit. It's not just about upside. It's about what makes sense for this team. And at the end of the day, they're making picks for now, but they're also making picks with the idea of who are going to be the best guys to support our main guys when we have to start paying all these guys. Who are some guys we're going to step up, we know, immediately on their rookie contracts and help contribute. It's going to be fun to see. Damichael, you got anything else for us?
That's pretty much it, Shawn. We just hit on it. All I will say is if you have watched these past 3 episodes, if you haven't watched the last 2 where we talked about the point guards and the wings, it's kind of clear a roadmap where the Grizzlies can actually address all 3 of these. If you look at the players who we think have value at certain spots, just listening to me and Shawn today, it seems like the center, the best value is getting those guys up high. Point guard, we talked about a couple options who could be in that mid-range, in that 22 to 29 range, who could fall right in your hands. And then on the wings, there were some really good options who could possibly be together on that back options in terms of the late first-round pick, the 29th pick, or potentially even the second round. But there were some wings we talked about as well that the Grizzlies can go trade up to get. So it's all coming together. The plan is definitely coming together, Shawn. The Grizzlies have infinite amount of options. At the end of the day, they have a great chance to make this team better.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, we also have nothing but any positive reason we have every positive reason at all to have faith in our front office to make the move. For Damichael Cole, my name's Shawn Cohen. Hope you have a great weekend. We will talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.